Good evening, everybody, and welcome to BrisScience for August? September? Where are we? September? Boy, time is marching on. 2023. My name is Dr. Joel Gilmore. I'm going to be your MC this evening. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. If this is your first BrisScience, a very special welcome. BrisScience is a series of free public lectures on science brought to you by the University of Queensland, where we aim to bring not just the best scientists, but also some of the best communicators to share their research and their passion with the audience of Brisbane and everybody watching on the live stream and catching up on YouTube. Hello. I would like to start, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting tonight and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that the first people of Australia have made great contributions to caring for this land and still continue to inform our understanding and science of this country. And we support them as they continue to search for recognition and a voice in Australia. So, housekeeping, if you've got a mobile phone, great time to turn it to silent, but don't turn it off because we will be taking questions tonight electronically. So you can scan this amazing QR code here that I've timed to appear on the screen just when I need it, and you can scan that QR code, put in the questions either as we go or there'll be some time at the end. After our talk tonight, we're going to have some food and drink. We'd love for you to join us outside for some nibblies and some conversations. You discuss what you've learnt tonight and show off pictures of your pets. Because, yes, that's right, because tonight our talk is about pets, or at least it is in a slightly roundabout way, because we're talking about pets and climate science. We all know it's been a pretty extreme time. The hottest winter on record in Australia has just gone past, 1.53 degrees above the long-term average, which might sound nice, but then we're going to get to summer. And we know that we're at risk of bushfire season this year, and that puts, obviously, humans at stress, but also our animals, both those outside and in our homes. And the warming world has other implications. So to dive into this a little bit more, I'm very excited to have our speaker tonight, Dr. Edward Narayan, who is a lecturer at the University of Queensland and leads the Stress Lab, where he works with everywhere from livestock producers to conservationists, understanding how our animals think, survive, and thrive. So tonight we're going to hear a little bit about what warming world means for these animals. So if climate change has got your goat, or you're just fishing for some new information, sorry, you're going to have to bear with me tonight. Don't worry, I'll remember the pecking order very soon. Please put your hands together and welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Ed Narayan.
Thank you, Joel, and to everyone here this lovely evening here in Brisbane. I'm going to talk to you about climate change and how it will impact animals and how to cope with them. But before I continue, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. I pay my respects to the ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. I recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So my talk today, it came about with a very interesting tweak to it. I have been studying animals. I was deeply fascinated with the wildlife and nature as a young man, growing up on a farm in Fiji with my parents. And in a family, so my dad is a dairy farmer, a small group of cattle that he keeps in a village. And I used to take milk in my backpack to school and on the way to drop it to households. And that's how we used to get some money to buy books. So my journey in the education system began with humble beginnings in Fiji. And as you can see here, I've sort of put in a trajectory as to how my life got into greener pastures, and I sort of moved from Fiji to Australia, and I have been very lucky to be able to do my postdoc at Griffith University. And then from there I went to India to do some more research. And then all of a sudden, life took me to Saskatchewan. So if you may know Saskatoon, a contrast to what we see here in Wagga Wagga, which is minus 30 versus more than 30 degrees Celsius. So it was a very interesting landscape for me and my partner at that time. And moving on, we decided that we were going to come back to Australia because this is our home. And we had our first son, and that was in Wagga Wagga, and with my lecturership appointment. So that was very lucky for me. So I was in Charles Sturt University for a couple of years. And then I moved to the foot of the Blue Mountains in Penrith, where I was at Western Sydney University. And then my mentors dragged me from Western Sydney to Queensland University just before COVID. So I moved over with my young family and have been at UQ a bit over 3 years now. So really lucky to be in this space, and thank you very much. During this journey, I have learned a lot of science, which I'm hoping to share, and hopefully you can reflect the energy that I have gathered over this time period. So a lot of people, a lot of friendly faces, a lot of mentors whom I couldn't have done without them. My professors, there's a lot of colleagues to name, but just a sprinkle of some images, as you can see here. People are there to help you and pick you up and take you forward. And I think that's the beauty of science. Doesn't matter where you are. It's how people appreciate and work together with you. So been very lucky in that space as well. And it's been an interesting journey for me and my group of researchers, which you will get to see very soon as well. So we've, as scientists, we actually publish our research, and we get to share our work with colleagues around the world. And it's great to see that our work is being read and referenced, and you can see that the story is being shared around the world, which is fantastic. So this is the stress lab, and as Dr. Joel said, I study animals. So the stress lab basically advances the welfare of animals and the knowledge on how animals perceive their environment by using physiology. So you can see in the circles over there all the different critters. Mostly at their back end, you'll see what I'm trying to say. We've sort of developed methodology that is non-invasive and animal welfare friendly, where we can actually pick up these subtle signals that the animals are telling us about the environment. So it's a nexus between wildlife and domesticated animals, and you'll see examples. So maybe you have a favorite, and you'd like to share your story as well as we go into this. So my research themes are conservation physiology, which basically looks at the physiological responses of animals to human alterations of the environment. So we look at the causative mechanisms and the synergy between various factors which actually guide the animal's biological response. We also look at animal welfare, which basically looks at the state of the animal. So I'll actually delve a bit more into these two themes, as you'll see in my talk. So the presentation will be made up of a bit of climate change and the global challenges, conservation physiology, stress, chronic stress, animal welfare, and then examples from farm animals and pets alike, and some conclusion. So, we are in this really interesting time of this year, as we know it's going to be quite hot, and it will be very challenging again for all of us. And we see on the news the word stress comes about quite a lot, and a lot of preparation is happening as to how our communities will deal with the hot summer period here in Australia. But it's a topic that is being looked into around the world. So, as you can see over here, there's a combination of factors that is interlinked with climate change. And the topic itself is much bigger and far bigger than myself or this platform alone. So it's not a climate change talk, but I will hopefully be able to demonstrate to you using the science that we have used to show how animals actually pick up the environmental change, and what a mild or a moderate change means to them, and is it something that we as human beings or everyday people need to be considerate of. So climate change, if you are looking for a definition of climate change, I have it here for you. It's basically defined by the United Nations Framework for Convention of Climate Change as attributes directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, which in addition to natural climatic variability is observed within over comparable time periods. So you can make an assessment of what that means for you. Conservation physiology basically looks at the study of the intrinsic physiology of animals and be able to understand what the animals are telling you about the environment in which they are being kept in. So here, as you can see on your right, this is the conservation puzzle, and it includes a nexus of various things, for example, endocrinology, behavior, population biology, ecology, a bit of luck as well, which you will see what I mean by luck. This is where it all started for me. On a small island in the Fijian archipelago, so this is my PhD study site. If anyone wants to tag along with me next time, you can do that. It's a small 60-hectare island made up of a very lovely group of people, the Viva Island villagers that live here. And on this island is a very interesting animal. You might want to guess what it is. It's not a tiger. And so I can put that into reference to Australia, and you can see over here, that's my PhD study site, and that's basically where I was born, and the rest is pretty much history. So this is it, the Fijian ground frog. Okay, so I was, quite a good undergraduate student, and I was guided by my professors to do a PhD very early in my career, and was supposed to go and look for eggs of this frog. I had no idea what a frog egg looks like. So, Edward, you have to now go and search for the eggs of the Fijian ground frog. Luckily, I did discover the eggs and was able to open up new dimensions into the ecology and biology of this IUCN endangered species. So there is very limited information. Naturalists, with some of whom I've actually gone into the bush and taken pictures of frogs, have taken the effort into looking at the ecology of the species, but putting it into a scientific platform is another thing to do. So my job was to, first of all, go and find the needle in the haystack and then try to breed them. This is life and its vulnerability right in front of our eyes, and we can put that into perspective of any animal that we may know of. You can see how vulnerable animals are in the environment in which they live. So the frog that I'm talking about, that actually lays eggs like a little bird. The females become quite heavy the underbelly becomes quite heavy with the egg, and then they eventually create this nest in which they will lay the eggs, and the male will come around and trickle and spray the sperm on these eggs. Nobody has still discovered the mating ritual because it's very cryptic. And what we see over here is that in this little marble-like structure, the whole world of animal and biodiversity is sitting. And very interestingly, this egg is actually covered by certain antimicrobial agents, which actually prevents the nest and the egg from getting decimated. So a very interesting creature. So my job basically as a PhD student was to go and search for the ground frog eggs, bring them into a breeding chamber, and look at its developmental biology. And as you can see over here, the frog starts off with a very thin line-like structure on the egg yolk, and slowly you can see the eyes, the brain, the spinal cord starting to develop. It's so amazing as you can see the eggs, and how it actually I got to discover this was, became very stressed and depressed at some stage of my PhD cycle. Nothing was working out, and I was like, what the heck have I signed up for? Students were walking around outside the enclosures and looking at this guy with soil and mud all over him, searching for something in the ground. One day, the frogs bred, and I could see really shiny trickles of beating heart, which fascinated me. The other side of the story is that my two PhD advisors, one being a conservation biologist and the other being a physiologist, were not sure what to do with this. So I was sandwiched amongst two really brilliant scientists, but then I had to choose my own path because I needed to finish my PhD and move on in life. So as you can see, when the frogs actually are born, they are highly vulnerable, and they carry themselves through just in 29 days. They are born like a little baby froglet. So they are direct developers and don't have a tadpole like what you'd see in a cane toad. So what then happened was, I was not just looking at the developmental biology of the frogs, I was just actually collecting their urine samples, their pee. I was going to this island, catching a frog, picking it up, collecting its urine. And you might wonder, why was he doing that? So at that time in New Zealand, the Archie's frog, which is a highly endangered species as well, was trying to be saved by a group of scientists at Auckland Zoo. And I was very lucky that, Edward, you are now going to go and save the ground frogs. So what we were going to do was to try to sequester the hormonal signals of these animals just from their urine samples. So you are thinking about testosterone, progesterone, estradiol. Normally you'd be needing blood samples for that, which is highly invasive. And going through animal ethics committee with the endangered species, forget about doing a PhD. What we look at over here is the connectivity between the brain, the behavior, and the ecology of the animal. So you can see a green frog with its brain. You got the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. In frogs, it's called the interrenal glands, which basically is picking up all the subtle signals around the environment. You may have a snake, a mongoose. In Fiji, we have not a lot of invasive species or predators, but we've got another interesting animal, which I will keep a secret and show you very soon. And these frogs actually pick up all these signals, and the stress endocrine system, which is the HPA axis, as we call it, helps the animals to overcome the stressor. So it's like going to the pub and having a drink. Well, it's actually happening inside your body. So cortisol is circulating, and then it opens up and gets unlocked from its, it's kept in a locked state for a particular reason in the blood. And it's highly conserved between humans and lower vertebrates, because if you keep cortisol unlocked, it can actually make the organism in a hyper state. And I'll show you some examples of that as well. So think about what could be happening inside an animal when we actually change the environment in which it lives. Bless you. As you can see over here, this was the fun side of my PhD journey, having put into different village groups throughout my field work. And sometimes I would go into the wrong house, but still they wouldn't mind. And being able to actually become blended into the lifestyle, the traditional lifestyle of the Vivalan people, and really makes me so happy about that. And you can see the local boys would actually help me. We are doing an acute stress response experiment where you actually keep these frogs in a bucket and then you measure their stress response after 2 hours all the way till the next morning. And this picture just shows you the vulnerability of the island itself and how exposed it is to the nature. Then from there, I basically took a whole bag of thousands of frog urine to New Zealand, because in Fiji at that time at the University of the South Pacific, we did not have the technology whatsoever. So I was just collecting this water-like thing called frog urine, which my supervisors had said that, yes, Edward, there will be something in there. Don't worry. Come after 2 years to the Ecogene lab where I was based, just for 3 months and having to analyze all those samples. Someone was looking after me. We managed to actually publish the first ever study to show that we can detect hormones in frog urine. You can see some beautiful diagrams and some beautiful parallelism curves, which actually demonstrates that we can actually measure testosterone, which is the male reproductive hormone, progesterone, estrogen conjugate, which is the female reproductive hormone with progesterone as well, in frog urine. Who knew we could do that? What's next? Well, that actually opens up a whole window of science into frog ecology. I became super excited, and then basically being able to demonstrate seasonal variation in the signals of the frogs, looking at their testosterone level. This is a frog that lives in Fiji. Must be a really chilled frog, you might think. And so you can see the seasonal patterns of the hormones in the animals, which is basically depicting the Fijian wet season. If you go to Fiji in like December, January, that's like our summer, obviously, and it's quite wet and rainy. For those of you who haven't been to Fiji, you should go there. And you can see how the frogs are actually picking up the signals from the environment, and it's actually demonstrating the basic ecology, and we have put a bit of science into that. But it's not just about looking at the basic science of the animals. The important thing here is that you can actually disrupt the ecology and the biology of the animal if you don't achieve homeostatic feedback. So if, for example, I'm really stressed, I need to go and do an exam, or I'm getting married. It was quite stressful actually, but now I'm quite happy. If you don't have the negative feedback loop, then life is stressful. Okay, and this is the basic pathway that my research group is exploring at the moment, because we want to understand what's the dynamics between turning on and turning off the stress response, because if you don't turn off the stress response, life is hell. You'd better be dead. And this is what's called chronic stress. Okay, and it's a very sad story for animals that are being exposed to these situations. And what we see, the songs and the beautiful signals that the animals display in their behaviors, it is disrupted. And most of the time when you see a behavioral change in an animal, for example, you wouldn't see the platypus coming out at the time of the year that it normally do, or the birds are not doing the things that they would normally do. Something has gone wrong. It's chronic stress. And it's basically the subclinical effect of stress on the animal, and the physiology is lagging behind the environmental stressor that has been pumped into the species. And that's a very serious thing. And we've actually looked at this in Fiji, in the beginning, where we looked at the dynamics of interaction between the cane toads. This was the other evil animal. Well, it's another animal for that matter, but it's unfortunately living in Fiji, and it's over-competing with the ground frogs. And we know the story of cane toads here in Australia as well. And it actually inflicts fear, diminishes the nutrition, body condition, reproduction is gone out the window. You can see an animal sitting on the edge of extinction crisis. What's gonna be next for the Fijian ground frog? I don't know. I have been not stuck. This is my home. I am here in Australia, but I'm really worried about the Fijian ground frog and other native species in the Pacific Islands, because we need to keep watch of that space at the same time as well. So the Australian government had sent me to India to go and collaborate with some lovely researchers at the University of Pune, where I actually studied some very interesting frogs through the Australia-India Early Career Postdoctoral Fellowship, and was able to help this beautiful group of students set up their endocrinology lab. Very interesting landscape, different to what we see in Fiji Islands, and this is at around 800, 900 meters elevation. You can see the frogs with the amplecting nuptial, sort of the underbelly, and the thigh itself would be, changing its colors as well. And this is a male frog guarding the eggs. It's called the Bombay night frog. Such a cool name, Bombay night frog. I wish I had the name. And we actually then studied these frogs and looked at its reproductive cycle. You can see the calling behavior of male frogs actually linked to testosterone levels as opposed to non-calling activity, and you can see the seasonal variation in the testosterone levels of male frogs. So it's opening up a window to the ecology of species, rare and cryptic animals of which we did not know much about, using some minimally invasive or non-invasive methods. And then I collaborated with researchers around the world. Here in Australia, some very high-profile researchers, and I'm lucky to be in the same space with colleagues named here. And you can see what we are doing now is we are actually trying to understand or even promote a bit that, hey, mate, talk a bit about physiology, because it's telling something about what animals are doing and how they will behave under various scenarios of climate change. You can look up this paper as well. By collaborating with some colleagues in the States, we were able to put together a summary of what sort of research needs to be done in landscapes which are very remote. A lot of beauty is found in remote and places that's underdeveloped, under-resourced. A lot of conflict between human and wildlife is happening outside of Australia. So we are hoping that we can go and study frogs like the Lake Titicaca frog. I don't know if you've heard about this frog. It's a very interesting frog as well. And we want to actually get as many frogs and their physiology studied before, something really scary happens. I think we still got time. So here in Australia, I think researchers are saying the same thing. Climate change exposes organisms to novel threats. What we've seen with the altered attributes to the animal's existence, we can see increased virulence, geographic range is diminished, dispersal of species is impacted, and you can see with the frogs at least, you must have heard about chytrid fungus. I can see some noddings in the crowd, so that's really good to see. Citizen scientists sitting amongst us, which is what we need, and you can see that a lot of animals are going towards the edge of extinction here in Australia. It's really scary stuff. I'll take a sip of water before continuing further. So from frogs, we then move on to large, majestic creatures, and the story is pretty same. It's really the drought and scarcity of resources which is contributing to the death of elephants. droughts becoming more frequent and predictable, and with less water and less food, you are seeing animals which are not able to cope with their nutritional requirements and going towards more and more towards increased risks to mortality. I'll come back to that scenario later on, but I'd like to take the torch towards our native small mammals. And you can see with the koalas, are they chronically stressed? Yes? No? This morning I had a very emotional chat while sitting in Bunnings. Don't tell me what I was doing at Bunnings, but I was talking to a koala rescuer, and there is a conflict between people and development. And I have been invited to study the stress levels of koalas in this landscape. So what we see is koalas are actually going through a barrage of stresses. And it's not just by chance you see a koala on the side of the road. It's a complex interaction between food availability, the need to disperse from one area to another. You've got, predators. Well, you've got some dogs and things like that. The biggest predator or the biggest threat is motor vehicle trauma. And disease as well, which is already in the system. So as you open up the system to novel things, and nasty stuff love vulnerability, they will just come and grab you. And so we can see that with koalas, I asked a question, are they chronically stressed? We knew a bit about the koala stress syndrome, and we wanted to see what their stress levels are like in various landscapes that they live in. So I asked the question, I said, how much stress can the koala bear? It's not a bear, we all know. We are all from Australia, so we know what we're talking about. And what I did was I ran a marathon of stress responses in koalas, all the way from healthy, which is very hard to find, animals which are not carrying certain diseases and things like that. And we looked at all the way to animals that were being impacted by bushfire and land clearance, and we can see the stress levels of these koalas are quite high. So they are going through certain ecological vulnerability and dilemma, which I'm a bit worried about, and we need to talk more about stress in these animals. So what we then did was, by teaming up with my colleagues in the stress lab, and these are a really young group of postgraduate and PhD scholars. Joe is an undergraduate student. So we actually looked at the interplay between the various aspects of animal welfare and how it actually impacted different animals. And the story is the same, whether you look at a clam or a lizard, an elephant, a goldfish, a cow, a koala, a pig. Stress is everywhere. It's really bad. So what is this stress? It's basically the physical stresses and the psychological stresses. And if you don't keep check of any of these things, it will actually go into your brain, and it will quickly trickle down into your behavior and your phenotype and your morphometrics. Your health and well-being in basic sense will be buggered up. So there is similarity across various species. Some of them will stop vocalizing, others will show erratic behaviors. You'll wonder what has happened to my animal. Heart rate variability is another thing to look out for, panting, and various other things. So you may have come across my conversation article where I talk about how to look after pets. And this talk is not just about pets, it's the journey of animals and what they pick up from the environment. But you can see, I've got some budgies at home as well. So you'll see that with the hot weather, they'll show some abnormal behavior. Feather picking is a big thing. And you want to make sure that the animals have enough food, water, and shelter. So basic needs are being looked after. We can see with cattle, heat stress really puts in extra pressure on milk production, the ratio of fat to protein, and there's this thing called the somatic cell counts actually goes up under heat stress. So animals are not able to have enough time to release the stress load, the heat stress load. And the same goes to, we played with a pet dog on our way to this talk, which was very nice. And you can see that dogs as well are our best friends, can be impacted by stress. Animals which have flat faces or short snouts, heat stress, and hypothermia can be a damaging effect on these animals. So keep watch for these early signs of stress, such as panting or erratic movements, because it can escalate to heat stroke and potential death. What we did also was a study by Mario Kang, one of our PhD students who has just graduated. You can see there's a whole suite of weapons available in animals. You can pick up any of these axes. You can look at the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. You can look at the adrenal axis. You can look at the autonomic nervous system. We are pretty much full of nerves. That's what we are. And that's a good thing. But the problem is that if you actually pump in extra stress on the animals will start to go through various physiological changes and behavioral changes. For example, tachycardia, core body temperature will go up, and you will have poor response to heat stress situations. And this can be very bad for like race horses and other animals which actually perform very high level of activity in a short burst of time period. What I'll do finally is have a bit of a conversation with you as to how we've then taken our research into production animals, farm animals, and been able to pick up some signals in these animals and try to understand their stress responses. So this is merino sheep. I'm very proud of this stuff, so don't think I'm gone mad or anything like that, but this is something that's very close to my heart. And we are very lucky as researchers because we are working very closely with farmers, and we can actually measure stress in the wool of sheep. So we can measure cortisol from the wool of sheep, and that's really cool because we can now track all the way to 10 millimeters or 1 centimeter of stress and carry it all throughout the year and link it back to the wool quality. One of the interesting works that we are involved with is maternal fitness, what sort of genes the mom is passing on to the offspring under various stress scenarios. We have seen this in our research that if you cook sheep and her embryos at temperatures above 39.5 degrees Celsius, the embryo quality basically goes downhill. You have a lot of non-viable embryos. So this is a loss to production. It's a loss to progeny. It's common sense. So what we are seeing over here is a combination of things that interplays to the stress levels of the mother. You could put any animal in this context. Here I have a sheep and her lamb. I tried to picturize my wife who was going through pregnancy at the time, and I was given this big grant by Australian Wool Innovation. And I sort of tried to bring her into the picture and say that, look, a bit of tendering love and care to the missus. And sorry, there you go. She's able to then have less stress. We removed her wool, which is a normal practice by farmers, and was able to graze more, and the body conditions and the wool quality of her offsprings were really, really good. So by doing some basic measurements of the biology of the animal, we put in collars which actually talk to the satellite, and we can see the green bars are actually mums that had their wool removed twice during the year, early and sort of just before mid-pregnancy. You can see she's eating more. With less heat load, obviously she will be able to do more things. So that was common sense, and science is common sense a lot of the time. And you can see over here, the mom which had a very heavy wool burden, she was not able to move as freely. Her activity budget was very low. This is not a stressful scenario. It's pretty much, tracking through time. You can see on the right here, it's 26, 27. So that's within the thermoneutral zone of the sheep. So this brings me to this picture here. Where are we headed with all this? Which one do you want? The picture on your left or the picture on your right? The picture on your left is basically a drought year where the sheep had gone through a severe drought. Our regional, this is regional Australia, which has gone through severe drought. A lot of animals are already dead. And so you can see that they have actually printed. Stress is an evil. It actually imprints itself onto your body. You can't hide from it. Doesn't matter how beautiful you may appear. This is the reality of life. I think this is where we need to be. This is Australia, Australian produce, Australian animals, Australian people. I think this is the beauty that we have, and it's a very much at the edge on which we are sitting right now. And we need to have this discussion around climate change, which is becoming ever more aggressive, and it places immense pressure on the people, the animals, and the natural landscapes in which we live. And with my humble view and a few things that I know, I have been able to present the physiological sensitivity of animals to the environment and how exposure to environmental trauma, such as heat stress, can actually impact animals. So please be aware of the environment in which you live in. Here in beautiful Brisbane, I came all the way from Toowoomba today. So you can see pets, wildlife, nature. We all deserve this world. And by actually doing some simple things at home and at our workplace, I think we can make immense difference into the lives of animals. With those few words, I leave you hopefully with a video of this lovely little koala. Oops, there you go. It's not picking up, but this is a koala that we are studying on Magnetic Island. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Ed. What an amazing journey. We'll give you a moment if you'd like to grab a glass of water or anything. You might be a little bit hoarse after that talk. Tough crowd. There you go. Thank you. No, too late. So we're going to take some questions now. Could we perhaps just pop up that QR code? Oh, right ahead of me. Thank you so much. We've already got some questions come through. Just a reminder that this talk, like all our past BrisScience talks, is available on YouTube, or this talk will be available in the next few days on YouTube. So check that back to see some of the amazing presentations we've had. And of course, sign up to our mailing list or follow us on X and other assorted renamed platforms, and we'd love to see you for our last couple of talks of the year. The next talk is going to be about artificial intelligence, but we're still waiting for ChatGPT to finish that blurb before we release it. And our final talk this year in November is going to be a science comedy extravaganza. If you were at our one last year, we're going again this year, so we'd love to see you there for that. So make sure you get your tickets in advance. All right, let me finally pull up these questions. Are you ready for some questions, Ed?
Yes, Joel, thanks.
Amazing. Okay, so first question is from Tanaka. Are farmers medicating stressed sheep? Or do they just play them a lot of Netflix? I don't know.
That's a very beautiful question. And actually, we were discussing this a few days ago. Playing songs to plants and they grow, and music, and I don't know where I'll end up at the end of all this. I think it's all, traditional meeting science. It's the tradition and the hands-on knowledge. I have been lucky to see my dad know so much about cattle and being able to actually, grow animals in challenging situations. So I think they have got something that we all should be proud of, and I think it's magical.
Amazing. Let's go back to the beginning. Jonty asks, so I think this is about your frogs from your PhD project. Do we know if the frogs choose a specific mate before the eggs are laid?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. They have a selection process. Yes, they do. Like in all walks of life, we have a selection process. And with the frogs, they actually look at the fittest male, which mostly relies on the calling activity of the males. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Kate asks, and which I think you sort of touched on this a little bit, but perhaps we can go a little bit deeper, is can we learn anything about human stress response from studying animals?
Thanks, Kate. It's a beautiful question. I think animals have a lot to tell us. And the songs and tales of animals, the physiology that we just looked at a bit of, it is telling us that it's not, life is precious. So we only get as much as our heart is beating. So if we don't look after ourselves and our environment, then it will get into an imbalanced state. And if it can only travel a certain distance, because there's after which there's no turning back. I think we as humans are very lucky with the support and everything that we have around us. We are always able to, as much as we can, are able to turn back in time. But with animals, I think time is running out. So we as humans have the power in our hands to do something today and right now.
All right. Let's go a little bit closer to home if you're up for some household questions. So Natalie says, I have a cat with long hair and a cat with short hair. Should I clip their hair off for summer, like a lion cut? I mean, the answer is obviously yes, because a lion cut is amazing. Does everyone know what a lion cut is? Giant head, skinny body. Basically, does that, cutting their coats, would that help them manage their body temperature better?
It's basically making sure that the animals get it's all about the looks. With pets, they have their own fashion parade on the streets. But I think more than that, it's the animal welfare. So making sure that the basic needs and heat stress can be a significant factor for these animals. So go for it. Get the advice from your local veterinarian and go and have fun with your pets.
So if the hair is long, will a pet overheat more so than if the hair is short?
It depends on how much of hair we have. If it is just like a pigtail, then maybe not. But if it's all over the body, then definitely it's something like a rag kind of a thing, then definitely something to be mindful of and have that conversation early enough so that we can prepare for that, for the animal's health and well-being.
Right. So the answer is yes, go and shave your cats into fun shapes.
No, don't.
You've heard it here from Dr. Ed. Pam asks, I don't know if you know this one, so are koalas in koala parks where they get held by people all day stressed out?
We did some research on koalas on Dreamworld many years ago, and Gold Coast Bulletin actually ended up writing on the front page, stress reduces sex drive of koalas. I never talked about their sex drive. Look, at the end of the day, these animals, which are actually managed by our zoos, they are the best trained experts that actually looked after our animals. And these are animals that are not your wild koalas out in the odd place in the bush. You will see the subtle differences between an animal that is being trained and tamed. It's the nature and nurturing of these animals. So they are actually accustomed to living with humans. And we've actually seen that with more and more koalas starting to come into urban landscapes. So you will not scare the hell out of a wombat or a koala if you go to a zoo, but just be mindful that these are wild animals and have respectful interactions with them when you are actually interacting with these wild critters.
Amazing. Okay, just refresh. We've got a whole bunch more questions come through. You up for a few more?
Go for it, mate. I'm just warming up.
Okay, great. So Monica wants to know, do cane toads and other invasive animals have a higher ability in dealing with stress?
Wow. Is this a question from Rick Shine? Look, this is an interesting question. Everything has a beginning and the end. We've seen with the cane toads, the work done by Professor Rick Shine, and I've been lucky to actually interact a bit with him. We've seen the cane toads that are moving towards the warmer, up in Queensland, they actually grow longer legs, but they also end up having a trade-off with ulceration in their backbone. So there's a trade-off as to a win. It's not a win-win, it's a trade-off. And these animals are getting acclimatized and accustomed to our landscape. They have done their best. They've done well, cane toads, But again, we'll see how they do, because we've got a lot of cane toad busters out there as well.
Right. Rachel asks, does your research support the need for Australian sheep and cattle to be provided with shelter? If so, how do we support that and encourage it?
Thank you. That's a very important question for our livestock sector, and a lot of research investment has gone into shade provision of animals. You're not just looking at an animal on a farm, we've got tree cover as well. Animals will go and use even that one tree out in the farm, but also in feedlots, we've actually had a lot of investment into having shades in place, because it's shade, that's all what we need to actually reduce our heat load, and that's gonna actually have a significant impact on the quality of the produce at the end of the day. So definitely it's a big number one on the list.
Great. All right, last couple of questions. Let's go for our big one here first of all.
I'll just grab some water if that's okay.
Yeah, you definitely want to settle in for this one. Let me.
Okay.
All right.
Bit scary.
We do have a packed lunch here as well if the questions go on too much longer. We prepare for all eventualities. Please lock the doors. So Joe asks, by 2046, there will be 900,000 more homes built in southeast Queensland, which feels very optimistic given our current pace of change, but let's go with it. 900,000. What will the potential impact be on wildlife? And is the stress from all of this build-out actually going to kill off wildlife in Queensland?
Yeah, and that's the very reason I think in my lifetime as a scientist, I have something really important to discuss with colleagues such as yourselves. We are, sustaining humans here in Australia. There's a lot of growth happening out here and in the Sydney area, everywhere. So this will definitely create I wouldn't call it an imbalance, but there will be something to look out for with animals. We've seen bats, we've seen birds, we've seen people having a bit of a fear with animals around them or not sure what to do with them. So the question around whether the animals will become too stressed, I don't think, I hope that will not happen. I might have to leave Australia and go to Spain or somewhere, which I haven't decided yet. But the thing is, we need to have that conversation. Like we've got a young man here in the audience. These are the future, and we need to have that conversation. We need to carry our conversation all the way to the change makers, to the people with the pen in their hands who actually write as to what the future of Australia will be. So we need the people to have that conversation right now. I can't predict whether the animals will be overly stressed or not, but if we don't do anything right now with the landscape and the environment in which we live in, then you can see what the chronic stress will do. It will shut down your stress response, the lock will be broken, cortisol will be everywhere. It's a very dangerous thing.
That is such a great message, which leads into my last question. There's been a couple of people, Sharon and Vanessa, who've asked, what should we be doing, so we've got the big picture level, and then what should we be doing as individuals? If we've got a hot summer, is there anything we should be doing for wild birds or animals in terms of food, shelter, water?
Yeah, I attended the National Koala Conference and gave a talk and interacted with over 500 people who were just talking about koalas, and I met a couple from out west, and they were talking about leaving out water. Water is the main gift that we can give to animals. So make sure that we actually leave some water behind in the backyard on a tree make sure we keep watch for what sort of birds. We are so gifted with a huge variety of birds. I'm just amazed that I live in Toowoomba. And you can see, we want to make sure that we actually work with the animals and give them access to the environment in which they live. If they're nesting in your, on your fence yard or in your veggie patch or anywhere, make sure you give them that space and just observe nature. I think it will teach you a lot of interesting things about life.
Amazing. What great words to finish on. Could you please join me? Huge round of applause for Dr. Edward Narayan. Fantastic talk. And we have a small gift for you there. Thank you so much. And of course, we would love to invite you all to come and have a very relaxing, non-stressful bite to eat and drink with us outside and show off the pets. Have a great discussion. Sure, chat to Ed. We'll see you all next month.